Hello and welcome to DotNetNuke module development. I'm your instructor, Scott Wilkinson. This is part 3 of a multi-part series on developing a custom module for DotNetNuke. In the previous video, we created our module project in Visual Studio using the Kristock template. We then built that module, which built the installation packages. We used the source installation package to register our module in DotNetNuke, and then we created a test page and added an instance of our module to the test page. So now we're ready to code the module, and we'll be building the functionality for a simple Hello World application. There's a view which has a message, there's an edit which allows content editors to change that message, and then we'll have a simple setting which allows the content editor to change the color of that message. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define my front end. If you recall, we added our module to a test page and the content area of our module is empty. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio and I'm going to go to the View ASCX, and I'm just going to add a simple label with some default text defined in there. And when I save the view and go back to my web page and refresh it, you can see that it's immediately changed. To make our module a little more interesting and dynamic, we're going to grab the message from the database. So to start that, let's go to our SQL Server Management Studio and create a table for our message. So I've created a script which checks to see if the table exists, and if it doesn't, we create the table. It's called module example message, and it contains a message text field to store the message. I'm going to go ahead and run it in my local DNN database and create that. But then we don't want to forget that we need to add it to our our providers, data providers, SQL data provider script, so that when our users install our module, it'll create that table at the time of installation. So I'll paste the script in here. In addition, we'll go to the uninstall, and we will also write a simple cleanup script for our table as well. And make sure I got this table name right. There. Now let's build out our data layer. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build it out in linked to entities instead of ADO.NET. So let's go to our data folder and our models folder that we created, and let's right click on it and add an item. And we will add a new item. We'll add a data item and an ADO.NET entity data model, and we'll just call it model. We're going to generate it from the database. The connect string stuff, we'll choose our local database, and we won't save anything in the web config. I'll show you in a few seconds we're going to configure it to use the DotNetNuke data connection. So just move on to the next screen here. And once it finds the tables in our database, we'll pick the message table that we built just a few seconds ago, which is module example underscore message, and we'll name the namespace module example data model, and we'll click finish. And okay, it built us our link to entity model. I'm going to do a few little cleanup things here. First I'm going to change this name of it to just simply message for brevity's sake, and then I'm going to also change the entity container name to just simply model. Okay. And now what we need to do is we need to put some code in order to allow this to pull the connect to the DotNetNuke installation of our user, which may not be, our local database. So the trick to doing this is what we'll do is we'll add another class here, and we will call it, a normal C# class, and we'll call it model. Okay, and what I'll do then is I will paste in some code here. And so what this is doing is I'm defining this as a public partial class model. There's already a class called model, which is my code generated class from the entity framework. So the reason I'm declaring this as partial is so that I can define a part of this model class in a separate CS file, and if the code from the entity framework gets regenerated, I won't have to paste this code back in. So therefore we'll just put it in a separate file with it being a partial class. So what this is I'm declaring a static instance method, very similar to how we do our ADO.NET singleton pattern for our data access layer. And these few lines of code, what they're basically doing is it's calling the DotNetNuke 8 Common Utilities Config API, this function called getConnectString, and that's what gets the connect string of the DotNetNuke installation that our module is running in, and then it assigns it to our model so that it's automatically using whatever the container's entities or connection string is. So great, let me do a build and make sure we have this working, and yes, it succeeded, so now our data layer is done. Okay, so let's build out our business layer next. We'll go to our components folder, and we have a feature controller that was already included in our template. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste some pre-baked code into here as the class, and I'll explain what it is that I'm doing. And I bet I'm going to have to pick up a couple namespaces here to include. Okay, so what this is our feature controller, and like I said, .NET-Nuke modules like to have a controller class to define certain special types of interfaces that we can implement in .NET-Nuke. Those are outside of the scope of this video, which would be iPortable, iSearchable, and iUpgradable, but it also serves us as our business layer, so that's what we'll talk about now. I've defined two public methods in our business layer for our presentation layer to use. One is called getModuleExampleMessage. The other one's called UpdateModuleExampleMessage, and they do what their names imply. One of them gets the latest message out of the database, and the other one updates it. So let's go ahead and do a build and make sure we still got everything working. Yes, so now our build is complete. We have our data layer and we have our business layer done. So now let's move on to our finishing out our presentation layer. Okay, let's finish up on our view here. So I'm going to go back to our view code behind, and I'm going to paste in some pre-built code here. And I'll resolve any namespace issues here. Okay, so let me explain what we have going on. We have our page load event, and what we want to do is we want to get the message now out of the database so that it's not hard-coded. The way we did that is I instantiated a feature controller that we just defined, and we're calling the getModuleExampleMessage method. Now, one thing I didn't explain in this method is this parameter called module ID. Module ID is a unique identifier of each instance of your module in the .NET-Nuke portal. As you know, you can instantiate a module multiple times, like your text HTML or even your own module. The users can add them to as many pages as they want. The module ID is unique to each module, and the reason I use this is because in my data layer, you want to have a unique message for each unique module ID. Otherwise, every module ID would be updated with the exact same message. So that's how we handle it. The other thing I wanted to note is in our view, we implement a .NET-Nuke API interface called iActionable. And when we implement this, we have to implement this module actions property. what this is this adds an item into the context menu of your module. And well, it's easier for me to show you rather than explain. So let me go ahead and build our module here. And it does build, good. And we'll go back here and we'll reload. Give DotNetNuke a second to restart here. Okay, this is our context menu. Here's our action. We can define any number of custom actions that we want using that iActionable property. And as you can see, when I've defined that as our edit action, it's actually going to go to our edit ASCX. Well, right now we don't have anything in there, so that's why it's blank. But that's how we handle these kind of custom actions, is by putting on our view that iActionable. The other thing you'll notice is now our message says hello world, which is the default action that's in our new business layer that we just built. So that's all good. We've got a working 3-tier app now. Next up, let's code out our edit. So I'm going to go back here to our edit ASCX, and I'm going to put some of our pre-baked code. Here's my HTML for the edit front end, and then I will go into the edit back end here, and I'll put in some put in some more code here. Okay, page load. I think that's what I want. Okay, so what this is doing is in the edit, when the page first loads, we want to get the message, just like in our view, we want to get the message, but we're populating a text box. Then when there's also a button on the page, which when the user changes that message and hits the submit button, again we instantiate our feature controller, but we call the update module message with the module ID and the new message, and then we redirect back to the view page. So just a note on how we redirect, because this is kind of important. The way we do this redirect is not by using hard-coded or even relative path expressions, because we don't want we don't know how different DotNetNuke instances are running. So the safest way to do navigation between your module controls is using the DotNetNuke common globals navigate URL. Now notice what I pass in here. It's a string.empty. The argument for this navigate URL is not the ASPX page or the user control, but it is the control key of your user control. And what I mean by the control key is, if we go back over here to the where is it? Our DNN manifest file for our module, and we look down here at the module definition and then the module controls. And notice we have 3 module controls, one for our view, which is view ASCX, one for our edit, and one for our settings. The control key is defined right here. The control key is unique for each module control, but notice that the view, by default, the control key is empty. And then for our edit, it's called edit, and for our settings, it's called settings. It could be actually named something different, but it has to be unique. So that is the argument that we're passing in to the navigate URL. So what this is saying is pass in the empty control key into our navigate, which means we're going to redirect back to the view. So let's go ahead and save this stuff, and we'll rebuild or build. Okay, everything's good, and now we're going to go look to see what we've done. Again, we'll give it a few seconds for DotNetNuke to restart, since we rebuilt our DLL into the bin folder. And here we are. Again, we're going to use that iActionable menu item we just did, and we're going to see how it looks. Great, so when we go here, now we actually see some functionality in the edit. The message is hello world, so now I'm going to add hello world. I'm going to add test to the end of it, and I'm going to click update. but our message did not change. So I wonder why. This is probably a good time to now go into how do we debug our module so that we can find errors. So let's debug this. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. I'm going to make sure I'm in debug mode, and then I'm going to make sure I rebuild the project, the debug version of the project. Okay, so now I'm going to set my breakpoint, and I went ahead and added it here in the update module example in my controller. I think that's where the problem is, so I'm going to set my breakpoint at the first line in this code, and I'm going to then go to the debug menu and attach to process, because again my .NetNuke is a external ASP.NET application that's already running. Since I'm running in Web Matrix, the process that I'm going to choose is IIS Express, because that's the web server that's built into Web Matrix. If you were using IIS, I believe the process name is w3wp.exe. So I'm going to go ahead and attach to that, and I'm going to go back to my website, and I'm going to retry my edit here. I think I'm going to have to wait for it to restart. Okay, here we go. And then when I click update, hopefully, yes, you can see it did break into my module. And so let's debug a little bit here. Now we can just use the normal Visual Studio debugging where we step through the code. So we see that we've created a new message. We got a module ID. We have the new message, which is hello world test. And we do model.addMessage, and we are done, and we redirect, and let's see what happens. But as you can see, it still does not take that change, so there must be a problem in the update somewhere. Just so you know, I know what the problem is, so I'll tell you. Maybe if you're a link to entity person, you probably caught it. Back here in my feature controller, one of the things, whether it's linked to SQL or linked to entities, are very similar in the fact that just because you add your new record to the collection doesn't mean it'll actually save it to the table. We forgot to do our model.save changes in order for it to come back up. So let's debug that again. This time what I'll do is I'll set up my breakpoint in the view to see if we in fact are getting the correct message here. And let's just see what happens here. So I'll rebuild the module, and we'll go ahead and attach again to the debugger. I'll go back to my page and I'll hit refresh to restart it, and we'll try that edit one more time. It should work now. Oh, it already caught my breakpoint here. So hello world's the current message. Now we'll just continue on. We'll go here to edit. We'll change the message, which hits our breakpoint back on the view, and here it is, hello world test. Great. Now let's set up our settings. In any module, if you go to the Manage Settings page, you'll see some default settings. The default module settings, the permissions, and the page settings. But every module also has a custom setting for that particular module type. And as you can see, ours is empty. So let's do something about that. Go back to Visual Studio here, and we'll go to our settings control that was created for us in the template. And you notice that the template actually creates some default setting HTML. I'm going to go ahead and overwrite that. we go. And then I'm going to go into the settings code behind, and I'll put some pre-made code in there, and I'll explain what I'm doing so that you know. And I think that's right. Okay. So the settings again consists of some front-end code and some back-end code. The settings will implement the module example settings base, which that implements the portal module settings base. In order to implement this base class, we need to override implement two methods. One is load settings, and the other one's update settings. In DotNetNuke, you will not need to implement your own storing and recalling of settings. DotNetNuke API handles all that for you. And the way it works is, in the load settings, as you can see, will be when I loading the existing settings for my module into the control. So the way we do that is we call this hash table called tab module settings, and we pass it in a string, which is a unique module setting for our particular module, in which I'm calling this for color. And when it pulls out the setting, it now has whatever my setting was. I always do a check to see whether it's null or not, because if it's never been set before, it's most likely null. So if it's not null, then I'll set the value in my front end drop-down list. Correspondingly, I have an update setting, so when the update of the module settings is clicked on by the user, we have a catch in here to update our own settings. In this case, we're instantiating this module controller class, which is in DotNetNuke's API, and then we're saying update tab module settings. We're passing it the tab module ID, the same string we're using for the load, and you can set this as a constant or put it in your configuration or whatever. And then of course the new value. So let's see how this works. We'll go ahead and let's go ahead and rebuild this, and we'll see how this actually works. So I'll refresh and let DotNetNuke restart here. Okay, and I'll go to Manage Settings. And now you notice I have some module settings. I've got a drop-down list which has some colors in it. One thing to notice though is I don't have a label here. I should have a label, but there's no text in it. Well, this kind of brings me to a new topic for localization of your strings, and so let's kind of visit that real quick. If you notice, I'm using a DNN label here, and what I'm going to hope to do is put the actual text of the label into our resource file. So the way that works is, if I have a resource file that matches the name of my control, which I do here, called settings.ascx.resx, I should have a corresponding help and text string for my control. Now the way it knows what the control is if you look at the ID of the control. I call it message colors, and all I have to do is make sure that I have message colors.help and a message colors.text, and these other two were created by default. I can just delete them. So I could put a message in here called, say select the color for the message, and the text of my label will just simply be message color. And as long as I have that defined, hopefully, if I simply refresh this settings thing, it should show me that without having to rebuild. There we go. So message color, and then my help is this message right here. So using the DNN label, we have both a help and just the label. So as you can see, it's set to black. That's my default. And if I set it to, say, blue and hit update, my method is going to fire that updates the setting to blue. Now, how did it actually change this? Well, let's look back in the code. I kind of glossed over this, but the code was put in there in our view ASCX. If I'm referencing the settings here in the page load event, again, same string here, so you could put it in a global constant or somewhere. And I'm saying if it's not null, then set the for color of my message to whatever that color happened to be. So that's how we implemented the color. So now we have a fully working module. We have a view. We have settings, which has a setting that changes the color. And we have the ability for editors to edit the message.